Hey, everybody. Um, Welcome to Everything You Need to Run Small Groups Like a Pro. I wanted to put this together because I think so many of us have been struggling with running small groups this year in general. And then we end up, I think what happens is a lot of teachers are ending up not running small groups or feeling really frustrated. And what we know is that, teaching through a small group is really, really super effective. So I wanted to jump in and just kind of give you all a little bit of information that you can take and use as you move into the next few months of your school year. Okay, so what we'll cover today, just a little bit of an introduction, why we run small groups, how to set up and organize small groups, strategies for running small groups, ideas, specific topics to run in, to use during your small groups, and then kind of a quick little Q&A where I'm just answering some questions that folks have asked over the last few months. So my name is Brandy Rosen. If we haven't met yet, and I've been in education for nearly 30 years. I've been a special ed teacher. I've been a behaviorist, a new teacher mentor, an administrator, kind of the whole really from A to Z. I live in Los Angeles. I'm married with 3 kids, and my company Teaching Untangled provides training and professional development for teachers that you can actually use. So that's really my goal in creating the content that I do is to make sure that it's content that is really usable. I, along with most of us, have spent many an hour in professional development that was not applicable or not something that I could actually use. So I really try to never put together any content or information that feels that way for teachers, because then it's just time wasted and we don't have time to waste. So let's jump right in. So why do we use small groups? Because what we know is that a lower student-teacher ratio improves learning. And that has been researched, from beginning to end, and there's no question about it. So small group allows us to have that lower student-teacher ratio. It also is a really, really nice way to differentiate because we're in these smaller groups. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we can do that within the different small groups, but it allows us to differentiate. And it increases participation because if students are 4 or 5 in a group as opposed to 30 in a group or 25 in a group, there's just more opportunities for them to participate. It really allows you to get to know students and for students to get to know each other. And it allows you to provide timely feedback to students, not having to wait maybe till the end of the lesson or the end of the day, or maybe on the one day that you get to work with them individually. It allows you to really give feedback. And we know that feedback is where all learning takes place. So that's super important. So how do we set up and organize our small groups? Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about this because a lot of what people ask me is, I don't know how to set up my groups. I don't have enough kids that are similar in levels. I don't have enough kids that can work independently. It doesn't seem to work. And I think that part of the problem is that we've been trained and we have this belief that we can only group by certain criteria. And so when we really stick to that rigid thinking about how we group kids, then we do end up getting stuck and it gets really hard. But I would encourage you to think about some different ways that you can group. So one way is that you can group by ability. And that means that, you're going to group kids with similar skill levels in similar rotation groups. I like to use ability level for a lot of my grouping because it just allows for more independence from kids, because you are able to set up what they need to be more independent in their learning. I often will use more ability grouping during language arts kind of centers and rotations because it is more important for me to be able to really hone in on what their skills are. And then I might use another criteria when I'm grouping for, say, math or science or social studies. You can also group by the skill being taught. So you might be running centers where you might have a writing center. And so you're going to group the kids who are working on the writing. And then you might have a math center and you're going to group the kids that are working on math. And then you might have a reading, and then you might have a, art center. This works really nicely when you have more of a self-contained class, or when you have kids that only come in for certain times of the day, but you might have multiple groups in at the same time. So what I mean by that, in a special ed classroom, you might have kids that are coming in all at the same time, but some are in for language arts work, some are in for math work. And so you're able to just group by the skill being taught as opposed to the ability level. And then you differentiate within that skill. Again, group by activity. So if you may set up your rotations where you might set up your small group where you have a different activity, and the students may rotate through that each day, or they might rotate through that, in a week, depending on how you set things up. And then a really fun thing to do is to group by expertise or interest level. And this is really great for science and social studies. And so what I mean by that is, like, sometimes I'll have my students identify one area they feel like they're an expert in. And so then they lead that rotation for that day or that week. And so they might say, I feel like I'm really, really good at fractions. And so then the kids are grouped for fractions, with one student being able to lead that in each group, things like that. So really looking at using your students' strengths to be able to group your different small groups. And then some strategies for running small group. Okay, so this is really kind of the nuts and bolts of what you're going to be doing. Really important to really think through some of this before you get started. First off, and probably most importantly, is you're going to want to teach the procedure of running a small group. So what do I mean by that? I would say 85% of the time when I go in and I'm working with teachers and they're frustrated with their small groups, it's because they haven't taught the kids how to be in a small group. They haven't taught them the procedures. They haven't taught them what to do. And so then the teachers feel like they're always chasing around. They can never sit down in one of the centers. There's a lot of behaviors they see. It's very tricky if you don't teach the procedure. So some of the things that you want to focus on when you're teaching the procedure for a small group, you want to focus on the time frame for the instruction. So how long will they be in the group? This is super important. I like the use of timers. I try to always use a timer where kids can see that, but it's really important to know. Now, that doesn't mean it won't change. You may start your centers at 5 minutes, and that's fine. And you let them know that. And then as they move through, you might think you're ready to move up into 10 minutes, and that's fine too. But then you need to let them know that so they're really familiar with how long things are going to take. And again, timers are great for that. The other piece is what you expect from the time. What do you expect them to be doing? And so what I mean by that, now that doesn't necessarily mean what the particular lesson is. It might mean what do you expect them to be doing? So things that I teach are, I expect them to stay in their group, meaning I don't want them getting up asking me questions. It's not the time to go get a drink of water. It's not the time to go do anything else. I expect them to be interacting with the materials in some way while they're in that center. So I teach that as its own skill. The other piece that's super important is the acceptable noise level. Now, that is going to change for each individual person, and it might change for each center, and that's fine. You can teach them before they sit down into that group what it is the acceptable noise level. You may have one small group where there should be no talking at all for whatever that activity. You might have one group where it's very, low. It's maybe a level 1. And then you might have another one where, say, they're playing bingo, and you might say it's okay to be at a level 3. But you want to teach that and let them know that. I like to use a visual at each of my small groups. And what I do is I have a visual I used for my noise level, and I have a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 noise levels. And I have a picture on each table of what the appropriate noise level for that particular rotation is. So I print them out, I laminate them. All I have to do is throw it down on the table, and then the kids have that visual to be able to know. It's really important to let them know, again, if they can move about during the small group. Maybe it's okay. Maybe the activity is actually a movement activity. Maybe they move from the rug to a table. All of that is fine. There is no right or wrong. The important part is that you teach them and you practice and you let them know what it is you expect of them. And then also, when is it acceptable to interrupt the small group? And this is super important, because what I see is when, and this is, is often a common setup where the teacher's working with one small group and then the other kids are in other small groups. Maybe they're with a parent volunteer, maybe they're working independently. And throughout the time that the teacher is working with the group that they're working with, it's interruption after interruption after interruption. I don't understand this. I can't figure this out. I don't know how to do this. And the teacher's time with that group, which is critical, is being interrupted. If that's happening, then you need to go back and practice the procedures more. You need to teach what the acceptable move about is. You need to teach them what you're expecting during that time. And if they're not able to do it, then you need to go back and practice. You need to adjust and practice, because this is how we get to a point where small groups just start working on their own, and they're really, really powerful and they work really great. So number 1, teach procedures. Number 2, teach students what to do independently. So important. This has been something I've been working with teachers now for the last few years, is really focusing on that independence. What I found is that since we have all kind of returned to normal, quote unquote, normal schooling, one of the biggest areas of impact for kids has been their independence. I think that many kids were home with maybe a one-to-one adult, walking them through things. They had everything kind of on the screen in front of them. They just don't have that same level of independence. And I'm talking all the way from, 4-year-olds through high school. And so it's really important that we teach the students what to do when we're talking about independently. What I like to do is write out the goals on a chart paper or under a document camera and keep them visible during the lesson. So I want everybody to know what it is that they're doing, what it is that they're working on. Now, I like to do this on a printed piece of paper, and I laminate it and I put it on the table along with the timer. Or if it's kids who are non-readers yet, you can do that through pictures and you can show them step by step what you want them to do. I also think it's really important that it's super clear what it is that you're asking them to do. So when you're running and you're setting up your centers, you don't want a complicated activity that's going to be confusing and more likely for them to not be able to do it independently. You want to show examples and non-examples of the end product if that's something that's applicable. So if they're doing an art project, if they're doing a writing assignment, if they're doing even, a math activity, it really is great to show them on the table or in the space, or even beforehand if you just show on the overhead, what it should look like and what it shouldn't look like. So for example, sometimes when I do like a cut and paste kind of activity, I will show them beforehand what I want it to look like and what I don't want it to look like. And then I leave those for their reference as we're moving through, so they can be independent. They don't have to come up to me and say, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Is this what it's supposed to look like? They have all that information in front of them. Also really, really great way to support independence is to give kids options and choices within the center. So if I'm running a small group and it's a writing small group, I may, as part of, and we'll talk about this later, as part of the differentiation, but also as part of working towards their independence, I give them an option of what order they do the activities that they have to do while they're in the small group, if that's an option. So maybe they have a writing assignment, maybe they have, they have a journal prompt and they need to write. They also need to draw a picture, and then maybe they need to cut something out. I don't care what order they do that in, and they can make that decision on their own. So they don't have to keep asking me, what do I do first? What do I do next? You choose. And sometimes just that skill alone of saying you choose is very hard for kids, but really important also for them to be successful in that. And like I said, we need to make sure that there are options at all ability levels. This is so important. Remember, if you want a small group to work, even if you're grouping by ability levels within that group, there's going to be different ability levels. So make sure that there is something that every student can do independently. And it's okay if a student chooses to do something that's a little bit easier than they are able to do. That's okay. Not every minute of every moment of your day does a student need to be completing the highest level skill of what they're able to do. So for example, let's say you have a writing center. I love to set up writing centers. And during the rotation to the writing center, there are all kinds of things available to them. There are stamps, letter stamps, there are stencils, there are all kinds of different things. Then there are assignments where they need to write. If I have a student who can write and for one day they choose to do the stamps, that's okay, because they're still experiencing the letters, they're still working through, and it allows them to be independent, which is really what I'm working on with that center. Okay. The next piece of this, keep groups fluid. So that means we can do so many different things within our groups. What I see sometimes happening and what feeds into small groups not going well is that it's the same thing every single time. And so though it allows kids to learn the procedures, it gets boring. And so kids end up not doing their best because it's the same thing over and over. So some of the things you can do strategy lessons with reading, writing, math. You can do shared reading and writing, phonics review, guiding reading, reteaching, pre-teaching, enrichment on any subject. And that's something to really remember, that small groups are a really great place for reteaching and enrichment. So don't be afraid to have students do something that's similar to what they've already done. Don't be afraid to make a small group something that might push a student to an even higher level in something. And then also don't be afraid to just include something that might be loosely connected to something else that you've done, but really is a high interest activity and kids might want to do it. You can do language development. There's just endless amounts, but I encourage you to not just keep the same thing. So sometimes I do see that, like every rotation every day is going to include the same thing. So one rotation is Lexia, and then one rotation is this, and one rotation is that. And we start to see behaviors because it's boring and they're doing the same thing every day. So just thinking about keeping those groups fluid. And then as you take in everything that I said, really what's so important is that we practice. I see a lot of teachers getting frustrated pretty early in the school year that the small groups aren't working. And so I remind them that it takes a while for kids to get good with this, especially if they're young. And so we want to practice. A carefully planned approach can be so much more than a great way to differentiate instruction. It's also a great way to build community and help students develop skills such as self-management, time management, and independence. Using the first 2 to 3 weeks or more if needed, and don't be afraid if it takes more. It could take months at the start of the school year to learn about your students while practicing different aspects of small group work routines. You'll get a lot of mileage if you do that. So, time spent at the beginning will be time paid off at the end. And don't be married to the idea that it should take this amount of time for them to learn or this amount of time to get really good with it. It's just different for every group, and be okay with that. If they haven't learned it, if they haven't mastered it, that's okay. Keep practicing. And maybe look at if there's some things that you need to change to make it a little smoother. Okay, here's some ideas for small group. And these are just a small amount of ideas. Obviously, there is an unlimited amount of ideas that you can do, but I just thought I'd throw some up here as kind of a beginning, conversation. So for language arts, some fun things that I've done that I really like, alphabet sequencing, listening activities, independent reading, bookmaking, which I love. I love to have kids make books. I love for kids to do that with partners. It's very cool. Writing prompts, letter stamps, tracing activities, poetry stations, magnetic letters, decoding games, letter puzzles, word search, sight word bingo, partner read. All of those are really, really great to use for small groups. So much fun. Kids are engaged in learning, and a lot is being, and you're able to get a lot covered in a smaller amount of time. And then for math groups, card games, always great. Dice games. You can do worksheets with manipulatives, math sorts, number puzzles, number stamps, math games, real world math activities, which is super fun, where they go shopping and they get to do things with money, things like that. Fact fluencies, letter puzzles, number equation search, math bingo calendar, all of those really, really fun to do in a math small group. And then one of the things that we don't think about as much, but I'm a big proponent of, and I do a lot, is learning to learn and behavior in small groups. It's the best way to teach behavior. We try and do it as a full group, but it's not as effective as it is in small groups. So some of the skills that I teach when I'm running my learning to learn and behavior groups are paying attention, following instructions, taking turns, working independently, problem solving, transition in between locations and activities, disagreeing, making choices, not having a choice and still having to do it, asking a question, getting the teacher's attention, sitting on the rug, ignoring other behaviors. You can see that how much I love to do this, that there are just an endless amount of skills that we can work on within that small group setting. So good, so fun, and so effective. And really, really one of the most critical things that we teach our students, right? Because this is what makes them successful learners. I want you to remember that included in this training is a packet of quote unquote lesson plans on learning to learn and behavior skills. I say quote unquote because it's not going to be a lesson plan like you've normally seen. It's not designed for that. It's really, it's a little bit different because it's behavior and learning to learn. So each of the different skills includes the skill broken down for you with some ideas of how you can practice those skills in the small groups. So really simple. It does not need to be complicated. And actually one of the easiest small groups to set up. So check your inbox, check your members area, check your course, your online course access. I'll have all of this in all of those places so that you can find it and use them. And I would, I'd love to hear feedback and love to know what it is that's working and what's not working for you. Okay, now just to wrap up a little bit of a small group Q&A, some things that have come up and people have asked. What if they're too loud during small group? I will tell you, most likely they will be too loud during small group when you're starting. Remember, we talked about a couple ideas of teaching them what level of loudness you're okay with, putting a visual down, but sometimes it just takes practice. Sometimes you have to stop. You have to send everybody back to the rug and you have to start over and you have to practice. And so this takes time, just like any other skill. It takes time for them to learn what loudness you're okay with. And keep in mind at the beginning of a school year, they're coming from a different teacher and that teacher may have had different expectations. And so you just need to take the time to reteach that. It doesn't mean that it can't work. It means you just need to teach. How long should groups last? People always ask this, and this is my advice. Whatever you think when you're starting out, cut it in half. I know that sounds crazy, but we oftentimes overestimate what our kids can do and maintain for small groups. And so it's really important you think about the developmental level, the age, and really the group that you have. You might have a kindergarten group that comes to you, and boy, they just can focus, and you could do a 20-minute group and they're ready for that. Likely that won't be how the school year starts. You probably will need to start with a shorter group. You might have a 5th grade class that comes in and you're trying to do small groups and they can't hold it together for even 5 minutes. You look at where your group is right now, you start there, and then you can add time and you can really extend that. But first off, you need to focus on where they are right now. It doesn't do us any good to try and fight through, even if they're not able, to maintain. That just doesn't help. How many kids should be in a group? I like to say 3 to 5. That's my comfort level. You may feel differently. Sometimes people like only 3 kids. Sometimes with the older kids, you might do 7 or 8. Now, that's a pretty big group, but what works for you? Again, remember to really focus on the group that you have. So you might like doing a group with 7 kids, but this particular class can't do that. So you need to work with the group that you have, not the group that you used to have or the group that you wish you had, but the group that you have. That's going to be the key. When is the best time to do small groups? I believe anytime is the best time. Seriously. I do small groups throughout almost my entire day. I always have. I think that's when the best learning takes place. I do very short, whole group times. Most of the time is small group. I like to do it in the morning. I like to do it in the afternoon. I like to do it for academics. I like to do it for non-academics. I'm a big fan of it. I like to do it as much as possible. Am I a bad teacher if I haven't been able to run groups successfully? Of course not. It's hard. I would say take some of the information we talked about here, maybe try and run it once a day, maybe try just one group, try and bring it into your classroom in a way that's comfortable and in a way that you feel successful. Don't just give up and say it didn't work. Try and figure out a way to bring that back in. Can you run groups if you have a lot of behavior and no help? This is almost everybody this year that I've been working with. And the answer is absolutely. And I'm finding that this is one of the best ways to have less behavior in your classroom is to run small groups, because when you bring them all together, it's often tougher. The behaviors are come out a lot more. And so, I was working with a teacher who was really struggling. It was a kindergarten class and there was a lot of behaviors. And I reminded her that everything that you do in kindergarten is really important and helpful. And so it is okay if 2 or 3 times a day she runs a group. She runs small groups where it's just preferred activities. So one table is Legos, one table is Play-Doh, one table is make-believe. That's fine, because guess what? It's kindergarten. They're learning to take turns. They're learning to share. They're learning to play with toys in a different way. They're learning to be independent. They're learning to problem solve. All of that is really, really important. So don't feel like every minute has to be this really rigorous curriculum while you're doing your small groups. That's what makes small groups great. 2 of the groups could be academic based, one could be social skills based. One could be a play group, one can be a social group, and one can be a math group. Any of that is fine. So I encourage you to really think outside the box so that you can use these small groups to both help, academic learning, social learning, behavioral learning, and really just running your classroom a little bit more smoothly. They're really super effective and very helpful. So that's it. I like to only, I think that sometimes we put so much information out there and then it becomes overwhelming. So hopefully you're able to take a few of the tips that I shared today, use it in your classroom, and hopefully, really help make those small groups run more smoothly. And if you have any questions, you can find me at any of these places at brandyrosenconsulting@gmail.com. Always happy to answer an email. Check out my website at teachinguntangled.com or my Instagram at teachinguntangled. And I really hope that this is helpful. Don't forget to check out the lesson plans, and feel free to, email me, reach out, and let me know how any of this worked for you. All right. Thanks so much. And I hope you have a great day. Take care.